Did you start that? Because now everybody can hear what we're saying. I didn't start it either, but now everybody can hear us. Weird. That happened to me too. Hi, Kris.
Hi. How's it going?
Going good. How about you?
Good. Back in the office today.
There, you know, it's weird how we're going to crave to be back in our offices, and then at some point we're going to go, why were we wanting that? It's business as usual.
Hey, Brian.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, sorry. There we go. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Great.
Hey, Sasha.
Here, Sasha.
Everybody hear me?
Yes.
Sasha?
Yeah.
You're very dark though, Sasha.
We can't see you.
Can you turn
Like
the light
a-
on or something?
I'm appearing in my own camera.
Well, we can
Hold
see
on.
you. It's just a little dark. Just turn the
Not like
light
you're
on
in a
maybe
closet.
in your. Oh,
Hey, Kris.
Is that better?
you might try turning your light on in your room.
Yeah, the light is not going to do anything. Let's see if I open another window.
That's better.
There you go.
It's weird because on my camera I'm quite bright. You guys all look fantastic.
As do you, Mr. I send emails at 3 a.m.
Oh, somebody asked me how harder. We're recording right now, Wendy. I'm going to stop the recording until the show starts.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, you have to do it actually. It's not.
Okay. We are at 10 o'clock exactly. All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Macro Pro and Friends. We are coming to you live from the Macro Pro studio, and today we're hosting a special edition of Macro Pro and Friends. This is one of the many webinars we're hosting to add to our portfolio of educational events and opportunities for our clients and our friends. Today, we will be talking about coronavirus and the effects it's having on all of us in the claims industry. This presentation today is 1 hour of CEU credit in the state of California. Terribly sorry for the interruption. We're having a technical difficulty. We may have a cell phone that's on and not muted. So let's go back to that. So this is the one of the important parts. The presentation today is 1 hour of CEU credit in the state of California. If you've logged in via your registration confirmation, a certificate will be emailed to you within 36 hours of this presentation. If you're calling in, you need to go and back and log in via your confirmation email from your registration. That's how you're going to receive your certificate. So this morning, we have 4 panelists who are joining us this morning, and they are all experts in their field. Our panelists include Brian Pierce with MedRisk. We have Sasha Kharshan with Diann Law. Kris Bowen, she's with Work Comp Resolutions, and my name is Wendy Stevens. And we have with us today our moderator. She is Diann Cohen, and she's Vice President of Client Relations here at Macro Pro. She'll be fielding questions through the chat, and then she will be asking those questions. So we're going to go ahead and begin with Brian. Brian, can you go ahead and talk to us about telerehab?
Sure. Good morning. Thank you for having me. My name is Brian Pierce. I'm the Director of Clinical Services at MedRisk, and I'm a physical therapist by trade. I'm going to walk you through telerehabilitation, and I'll give you some updates on where this field is headed in light of everything that's going on in the current environment. So for those of you that are unfamiliar, telerehab falls under the umbrella of telehealth. So telehealth being a very general term for all of the services that can be provided remotely via phone or video interface. Telemedicine is a term most of us are familiar with, and that would be the delivery of physician services via a telehealth interface. Telerehabilitation would be the delivery of physical therapy, occupational therapy, or speech therapy via a audio-video interface. So we're talking about a physical therapist, in my case, getting on a computer screen with an injured worker in another location and having an audio-video connection. So this would seem counterintuitive to many people who hear this for the first time, because physical therapy would seem like the last thing that you could do from a distance because it's so hands-on. If you think about how physical therapy works, how important it is to the road to recovery and return to work, you realize that there's parts of the physical therapy experience that are active and some parts that are passive. So the initial first visits of physical therapy tend to be more on the passive side, evaluation, history taking, and then more things that the therapist is doing to the injured worker. So manual stretching or the use of modalities, heat and stim or ultrasound, things along those lines. But as the case progresses, things tend to move towards more active exercise. So when you see a patient via a telerehabilitation interface, you focus primarily on those more active components of treatment. So there are some patients who line up perfectly for this. If their primary objective of their program can be accomplished through guided exercise or working an injured worker through some ergonomic training, or talking them through recovery expectations and maybe some leveling return to work expectations. These 2 patients tend to work out very well. So traditionally, MedRisk has performed telerehabilitation over the course of the past 3 years for patients who have been engaged in an in-clinic experience, going down the traditional road of care, and then transitioning to a telerehabilitation interface as they progress closer to return to work. If you can imagine a scenario where someone has a surgery, they go through a lot of hands-on care for maybe a torn rotator cuff, and then as they tend to get closer towards that return to work, most of their therapy sessions are exercise and ergonomic and functional training, and then they transition back to work over those last the final phase of their rehab. So what we have been doing over the last few years was taking the more passive components and doing them in the clinic. And then for those patients who were ready, willing, and able to connect on telerehab, we would move them over to this platform to continue out and transition back to work. Now, of course, during these times, the interest in telerehab really escalated at a rate that I don't think anybody was really accurately prepared, appropriately prepared for the onslaught of interest in telemedicine. We have a team of therapists that see these visits, and we've had to escalate that team in order to accommodate the increased demand for telerehabilitation. But more importantly is we've had to change how we're delivering that care. So we had always been able to use telerehabilitation as a supplement to in-clinic care in the manner that I described. Now, in some cases, we were using this as an alternative to in-clinic care. So there are patients now who are unable to get into the clinic to even initiate care, and we've had to adapt our procedures to set them up with telerehab on the front end and do it as an end-to-end solution. In some cases, there might be scenarios where we're patients on an interface that looks like this, and then as their clinics reopen or their interest in getting out of their house and going to rehab opens up, they will transition from telerehab into an in-clinic experience, which is a little different than how we've done it. However, the mode that I described of primarily in-clinic and a little bit of telerehab is unique to our system. Most of the parts of the world where telerehabilitation is done, it's done as an end-to-end solution. So while telerehab is a little bit new to the United States and to workers' comp in the United States, it's something that's being done all over the world to solve issues that are related more to access. So there's parts of the world where you can't find a therapist within a reasonable radius of your home. And there's also the idea that even if they were within a reasonable radius, perhaps you don't have the wherewithal to get there 2 and 3 times a week. So most of the research that we built our program on is based out of the work that they've done in these other parts of the world on this telerehabilitation treatment. What they found is that if you select the right patient at the right time, the results on an interface that looks like this is equivalent or better to the results that you would get on an interface that would be in the clinic only. Now, we've taken a lot of time to make sure that we're selecting the right patients at the right time to transition to this. But now, of course, because the need is escalated, we're opening that window up a little bit. So far, what we've seen is that the outcomes have been equivalent in clinic care. But now that we've opened the door to having more patients that are not exactly a textbook fit for this interface, maybe more immediate post-surgical patients and things that are a little more medically complex or things that require hands-on evaluation, because we're opening the windows to some of those cases, it'll be interesting to see how close we can get the outcomes of this interface to mirror the in-clinic experience. I would bet that there's just going to be always some cases that will never fit into this model. It just makes sense that certain parts of physical therapy and occupational therapy and speech therapy need to be delivered through hands-on treatment, and obviously that's not an option for some people at this time. The reason why this works well, and in some cases works better, is because if you think about the rehab experience for those of you that have been through it, it really hinges on 2 factors. There needs to be an access to the treatment, and there needs to be an engagement in the treatment process. And if you think about how this interface would work, the access increases and the engagement actually increases. So from an access standpoint, someone can take the device out of their pocket and connect with their therapist almost any time of the day. They actually have the ability to now be able to message their therapist and relay information, through diarying their symptoms or whatever that might be. They have information that they have a means to connect with their therapist between sessions through what we call asynchronous care. That asynchronous care also increases their engagement in the rehab process. So at this point, we're able to upload to a certain platform, up to a portal, the types of exercises the patient needs to engage in, and actually the types of instructions that they need to help them through this process. So if you're imagining myself treating you as an injured person, there might be pieces of this talk that might be of particular interest to you. I would be able to record those and play those back for you, or leave them for you to play back on your own via the exercise portal. So the opportunity to really create more information and more access and more opportunities for engagement with the injured worker really helps to enhance the outcomes of the case. So again, if you pick the right person at the right time and surround them by the right tools, this would be a great interface. it certainly has come in handy during these times as we've been able to really open the door to continued care for some people who are really stuck at home, either waiting for their elective surgical procedures, or they're afraid to leave their house to go to therapy, or the clinic that they're engaged with has closed. So at this time, the real focus on telerehab has been escalated. But what we're seeing is those benefits that we've been able to leverage for the past few years are really doubling up to the service as being critical to helping close some of these cases that would otherwise be left kind of blowing in the wind for the time being. So I will leave it at that and open up to any questions.
Diann, do you have any questions for Brian?
Yes, Brian, can you tell us how this is comparable to the brick and mortar PT that people are getting? Are they getting similar results, or what are we seeing?
So at this point, I would say that you can expect the results to be similar, except in probably about 15% of the cases where the progress in the rehab really is contingent on the hands-on components of the treatment. Now, for those cases, let's say someone has knee replacement, and really for a big part of the recovery from that is someone physically stretching your knee out, maybe further than you'd really be willing to do on your own. And that's something that sometimes you need somebody to do with you and for you. That's something that you say, all right, if your rehab progress is contingent on that, it's probably not going to happen to the same degree. However, there are some ways that we can teach somebody to stretch it on their own. This is the same type of thing that they would do independently if they were doing a home program as part of their in-clinic experience. But now we really have to double down on that type of work and make sure they understand it and surround them by the right tools and the right equipment that would help them be able to continue to make those kind of range of motion gains at home. And we have the ability to assess their motion through their visits by using this interface and different technologies that we can surround the visit by. So to answer your question, I would say it's going to be pretty close for almost everybody, but there's going to be some that we're just not going to be able to get all the way around third base and home without some in-clinic care.
Okay, so you just told us that you do some recordings you can place in a portal for an injured worker to look at in the future. Are the sessions themselves recorded? So
that's a good question. That's a good question. So that's a hot topic on our end as to whether we should be able to record these or not. You can imagine there's a lot of energy around that from payers trying to make the decision as to whether that's a good idea or not. For injured workers, it's typically an easy question. They'd rather not be recorded and have a camera and recording their motions in their home. And who's going to see that? We really want people looking around and seeing what they're up to. On our end, we've made the decision to go with a platform that we could record the visits if we wanted to, if that ever becomes a real focus or a need. At this point, we only use that ability to record to take snapshots of individual components of the visit. So that might be recording them performing a certain motion so that we can compare it to them performing that same motion the following week, or it might be me recording myself giving some instructions so that they can have it memorialized so that they can hear back. If you've been to a physician's appointment and left wondering what happened here, or I hope somebody writes that down, the ability to go back and kind of play back what the physician or the therapist has told you during a 5-minute dialogue, it's really one of the strongest components of the program is to be able to kind of have those little snippets. So we record little pieces, but as a matter of practice, we don't record their entirety.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Brian. We have some handouts and they are attached to this webinar, so you'll be able to go over and grab them. And next we have Sasha from DeAndre. Sasha, can you give us a legal update?
Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here. Kind of the same place I've been for a few weeks now. My name is Aleksandr, or as Wendy said, Sasha Kharshan. I'm an attorney at DeAndre Law at the Oakland office, covering primarily the San Francisco and Oakland venues. So with regard to the most pressing issues from a legal standpoint, of course, the initial question has got to be COVID-19 and its implication with regard to AOE, COE. We already know that about 1,500 claims alleging industrial exposure to COVID-19 have been filed in California alone. This is, of course, only 1,500 out of some 36,000 cases in California, but certainly more will be coming. So the initial question for AOE, COE is simply whether someone who contracts coronavirus may file a good faith workers' compensation claim. The initial hurdle and burden is on the applicant, and it's going to be a Supreme Court. It's an old case of Marsh versus IAC, which stated that An ailment does not become an occupational disease simply because it is contracted on the employer's premises. It must be commonly regarded as natural to, inherent in, an incident and concomitant of the work in question. So it's got to be something related to work. So the inquiry does not simply end there. We don't simply dismiss the claim with prejudice and everybody moves on. The primary question becomes whether there's some sort of special and or increased risk from the nature of the employment. And this is where the case of Bethlehem Steel suggested that placing the burden on the applicant to establish that the workplace subjected the employee to some sort of special exposure. In the case of Bethlehem, employees working in shipyards contracted a contagious eye disease known as keratoconjunctivitis. And although the defendants showed evidence that the disease was also epidemic in San Francisco, the Supreme Court found the evidence quite convincing that the disease in the community of the shipyards was of much higher proportion than compared to the population at large. It found that the epidemic in the shipyards constituted a special exposure in excess of that of the common public at large. So as we all know, the burden on most applicants under most circumstances to convince the WCAB of an industrial injury and AOE-COE is not such a difficult burden to meet. An injured worker will not have to prove to a degree of scientific certainty, but only to a degree of reasonable and medical probability. Let me say that it would behoove all employers right now to keep very detailed records of efforts undertaken to prevent or at least mitigate against the further spread of COVID-19 for those industries, of course, still operating in public. For example, what sort of signs and posts do you have at the employment? Have you offered gloves, disinfectant masks, so on and so forth? Have you implemented distancing practices within your facility? It would be less than ideal for an employer to not only deal with an industrial claim, but in addition, have to face serious and willful allegations or Cal OSHA violations. There's presently, and obviously it's been a very short period of time, but there's not presently a presumption of compensability. As for example, there is a duty belt presumption for police officers filing claims of a lumbar spine injury. And frankly, I'm not sure we need a presumption, as certainly this feels like a situation of I'll know it when I see it with regard to which industries pose a higher risk and which do not. The custodian or a janitor, for example, who cleans up the grocery store all by himself at night after the grocery store closed, especially with a mask and gloves on, should not be exposed to a larger risk than the public at large. He should definitely not be lumped into a larger category of grocery store employees should a presumption be introduced. Again, because such a presumption would be overbroad, it would place an unnecessary burden on the system. But perhaps it is a little bit more sophisticated than that. I have heard some talk that Governor Newsom is interested in rolling out an emergency measure which would make filing of an industrial AOE-COE claim strict liability. It wouldn't even be a presumption. And this would be for all employees working outside of the home that contract the coronavirus while the shelter is in place. I personally believe that any such sweeping measure seems overbroad, over-inclusive, and is essentially callously looking for other deep pockets aside from the state itself. So again, the question becomes how high is the exposure risk in a particular industry? And this again returns us to the case of Bethlehem Steel. Was the exposure of the particular employment greater than the public at large? Did employment expose the worker, and how was the employee exposed? Arguments can be had on both sides with regard to nearly every type of employment. Furthermore, when looking at the risk at work as compared to public at large, exposure in most public settings right now with the shelter-in-place restrictions is significantly lower, thus making much of still operating industry likely to meet that burden of finding the exposure greater than the public at large. But on the other hand, you know, for example, the handful of people working to keep a restaurant afloat by offering takeout and delivery are probably adequately spread out within the facility that is the restaurant, that the present exposure at that restaurant may be similar to the risk of contracting the disease walking around the sparsely populated streets. I think the most glaring cases of AOA-COE will, of course, be healthcare workers. This class is not only working in a dense population, but are working with an acutely high volume of COVID-19 positive patients. Next category that I see would be essential workers, public safety, including police, fire, EMT, sanitary and trash collection workers, again, grocery store clerks, delivery personnel. And then we have various other occupations. Hello? I see.
Did we lose you, Sasha, via your camera?
Do you see me right now?
I do not, but that's okay. There you go. Keep talking.
Okay.
I can see you now. Thank you, Sasha.
So as I was saying, the next group of occupations that I'm envisioning is occupations before the shelter in place, which have since been deemed non-essential, but nevertheless worked in a relatively high density of population. I'm thinking of teachers, gig economy workers, such as employees of stadiums, those who work directly with Rudy Gobert, concerts, restaurant workers, travel and leisure industry. They would have the burden of having to backdate their exposure as if they had been laid off, furloughed, or allowed to work from home. The rest of us, what is the causation hurdle for all other workers? I sincerely hope that if this is going to be an issue we're going to be litigating for the foreseeable future, that common sense will ultimately rule the day rather than an emotional appeal. It will be interesting to see how AOA-COE breaks up and whether Gavin Newsom will in fact be introducing anything remotely resembling strict liability. I'm now going to focus a little bit on what the inadvertent or the forced shelter in place means for those applicants who are working modified duties or receiving temporary disability prior to being forced away from employment due to the shelter in place. There's, of course, a huge variety of different scenarios and fact patterns, each likely with their own legal implications for indemnity triggers. So the first one, and most glaring to me, is an injured worker who is already on temporary total disability, and just before the shelter in place, they're given some sort of restrictions that the employer would have been able to accommodate had it not been for the shelter in place. I believe that under this circumstance, the employee had not yet been brought back to the modified duties, and temporary disability should continue being paid. Another scenario I was envisioning is somebody who's already back but working on restrictions. So they're on modified duties and they're being accommodated, but now the business has temporarily closed. The injured worker is now seemingly off work for non-industrial reasons. This is, of course, akin to unemployment. However, from a legal standpoint, in these circumstances, we have to analogize to reasons behind the unemployment. For example, we know that if injured workers are accommodated and then terminated for cause, temporary disability is not thereafter owed. We have every right to terminate temporary disability because we would have continued paying the worker through the modified duties had they not been terminated. But if injured workers are terminated without cause, laid off, there's staff changes, administrative changes, temporary partial or temporary full disability, depending on the restrictions, may be owed. In this scenario, I'm envisioning that not only is the applicant for all intents and purposes laid off without cause, but actually it is the employer, because of the shelter in place restrictions, that is unable to provide further work. Thus, if the applicant has not yet filed for unemployment benefits, I believe it would be wise to commence temporary disability. Another scenario is an applicant was on temporary total disability or on restrictions which could not have been accommodated, but has not been released to full duties, though the employer is closed due to shelter in place. Because they have been released to full duties, I believe at this point, Had it not been for COVID-19 and associated shelter in place, the applicant would have returned to usual and customary work. And the cause of ongoing inability to return to work is clearly wholly non-industrial. My intuition under these circumstances is that the applicant needs to be notified of other state benefits, be it EDD or FMLA. And in the meantime, adjusters should commence reasonable estimate of PDAs and terminate temporary disability. Finally, if the applicant had already been found at maximum medical improvement, whether or not they return to work, I don't believe that the shelter in place triggers temporary disability. I would advise merely to continue issuing permanent disability advances. With regard to temporary disability actually from COVID-19, this benefit would not be most likely dispersed contemporaneously with them to the injured worker presently, because the claims are just not being filed. We still have the 90 days for determination. But if ultimately AOE-COE is found in favor of the applicant, there may be retroactive temporary disability owed. Presumably, if the applicant does not pass away, that would be a very short period of time because, again, the symptoms are supposed to last about 2 weeks. And there would be an argument that, the government's stimulus of $1,200 per person for various incomes is meant to replace wage loss. So there's a question of whether or not temporary disability would be duplicative. There's a much bigger issue with regard to if AOE-COE is established, the medical treatment for those in intensive care may end up being quite high and potentially into the 6 figures. I don't see too much concern from permanent disability if injured workers recover, again, because short of a passing, most recover in full. If there is any residual disability, you would look to Chapter 5 of the AMA guides for respiratory disease. There is, however, a glaring risk of potential death claims. California is presently reporting about 1,300 deaths and is showing signs of slowing down. Of those 1,300, I imagine only a small proportion will pass AOE-COE scrutiny. Finally, my last topic I'd like to go over is some of the effects on claims handling, something that I've been experiencing with regard to working from home and the effect that it has had on our claims. As you know, depositions are either being continued if applicant attorneys do not want their injured workers appearing over video, but otherwise have been over Zoom. And I have found that this has been a very efficient tool to carry on as previously scheduled without incurring unnecessary delays. And honestly, over Zoom, I'm able to, for the most part, get a full indication of applicants' presentation, be it symptom magnification, their general demeanor, something that may give me red flags. With regard to telemedicine, the injured workers treatment and med legal evaluations. With regard to treatment, I see absolutely no objection from a legal standpoint. We should not be delaying treatment, and the injured workers should not be avoiding treatment while they're sheltered in place. If doctors are offering the service, they should absolutely take advantage of it because we are in a rush to get the injured workers to permanent stationary or MMI status. With regard to med legal evaluations, I have always taken issue. There's been one QME physician, Dr. Bazat Ahmad, who's been doing telemedicine evaluations for years. There's been lower level decisions by judges to say that this violates QME evaluations. He essentially has been having a chiropractor with the injured worker while he carries out over video. Presently, we're seeing all med legals either be fully continued until a later time or offering to carry out via telemedicine. And it's going to have to come down to a really fact pattern specific analysis. How desperate are we to get the QME evaluation right now? If, for example, the injured worker has a very high temporary disability weekly rate and is presently receiving temporary disability. And we're really anticipating that MMI finding is going to come any minute now. Then I think it's worth not incurring unnecessary delays in going through the QME evaluation. If, however, they were back in work, the PTP has found them at maximum medical improvement before, then maybe it's best that we wait a couple of months for an in-person evaluation. Lastly, turning to the hearings of the board, expedited MSCs, these have all been over the phone. The judges have expedited the procedure. We're no longer dealing with court call, which is $54 a call. Judges all have direct lines, and I have to emphasize that these hearings have been fantastic. I don't know how many of you adjusters have heard from us defense attorneys complaining about the lack of preparedness on the part of applicant attorneys at hearings because they appear at 5-6 hearings at a time. The procedure now is that everyone is on time at the 8:30 or 1:30 hearing because judges, as soon as the time hits, they're taking roll call and they are moving fast. Parties either have a disposition or need to discuss further with the judge. So everybody's prepared. And I think all parties have a more keen eye to settlement than they usually would. I hope that actually some of these changes we're experiencing with regard to hearings are adapted going forward. For example, I would be fully endorsing that all status conferences at the very least take place over the phone rather than needing to travel to various boards. This again, status conferences are meant for little else than just for the judge to give one party or the other or both a little push toward resolution of whatever issues they may have. And this is an excellent, excellent way to do that. I'll hand it over Q&A.
Thank you, Sasha. I think that Diann was telling me there was a question.
There's one. Now, what happens when an employee gets injured at home and they're working from home due to the stay at home order? What happens to those employees and how should they be treated?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, a lot of industries allow their workers to work from home. I occasionally work from home. I know many adjusters work from home. But before COVID-19, the initial analysis would have been, is it your own liberty to work from home, or has the employer somehow, whether expressly or impliedly, directed you to work from home? Right now, with the shelter in place, I, for example, have very much directly been asked to work from home. Accordingly, my home now is a second job site, and injuries that I may sustain, especially during the work hours, would very much be AOE, COE. Some examples I'm envisioning are a slip and fall incident during my 8 to 5 work hours, or for example, me alleging carpal tunnel because at home I don't have nearly the ergonomic conditions that I have at work, or simply litigating a site claim, as I will be filing imminently for the hostile work environment I have with regard to my 2-year-old needing my constant undivided attention. So yeah, there will be cases of people having non-COVID-19 related injuries at home because they have been inadvertently forced to work from home. But the handling of those claims will be exactly the same as any other industrial injury.
Thank you, Sasha.
Thank you so much, Sasha, and thanks, Diann, for the Q&A. Thank you, Sasha, so much. Please stick around, Sasha, because we're going to have our final thoughts at the end, okay?
Will do. Thank you.
Fantastic. Our next speaker will be Kris Bowen, and Kris has a lot of fantastic information. So, Kris, can you tell us about liens and what's happening at the WCAB?
Sure. Thank you, Wendy. And I know Sasha mentioned this just briefly, but we're going to go over it a little bit in more detail. So, as many of you know who have taken our in-person courses that we do, I always talk about the DIR website and links on there. So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about where to go for that. The WCAB does have information. The DIR website has information on the WCABs and which ones are open, which ones are closed. So if you go to your DIR website, there's a list on there. And actually, as of today, only one is closed in California, and that's Eureka. Everything else is open. So if you do go to the DIR website, and at the top, there's a little information screen that at the top that clicks on to the DWC. When you go on there, it'll actually give you a list of the judges. There's 174 judges on there. And as Sasha mentioned, court call is usually working and it's $54. But right now, there's toll-free number, and it's the listing that the judges, directly to the judges with a court call number that's free for you right now. So that's all on the DIR website. Everything you pretty much need to know is what Sasha just said about the mandatory settlement conferences, priority conferences, status conferences, and all expedited hearings will still be heard telephonically. Everything else has been pushed back regarding trials and lien conferences until further notice. Everything's been pushed back. However, it's not very far, pushed back very far. So for instance, we had a lien conference on April 30th, and we just received notice that it's now May 6th. So it's only a week back. So it's not too far back. And then the WCB is only allowing for e-filing right now with Eames. So if you don't have access to e-file something, let us know. We can help you e-file anything you do need. The other item that is on the DWC website right now, or the DIR website, is the electronic signatures is allowed on settlement documents, applications, pleadings, petitions, and motions. So we can also help with that. So if you don't have access to electronic signatures, let us know and we can sign something for you. We are still working back and forth with injured workers, which we'll talk about in a second. So right now, Wendy, we're going to go ahead and jump into the next slide or next area, which is lien resolutions. So for lien resolutions, now is a great time to settle your liens. Most of the lien claimants are still working. They're willing to work with you right now, especially the larger companies, medical lien management, all of your favorite lien claimants are still around. Those that maybe aren't working, there are supervisors for the lien companies that are taking on files, and we have been working directly with some of the supervisors for medical lien management and Mesa Pharmacy, all those fun ones. But now's a great time. They're going to try and consolidate files with your offices because they're trying to get you to settle as many as you can. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that on the adjuster level, but if you need help doing that, or if your supervisors want to do that, let us know. We can try to consolidate and settle multiple ones. They're going to really be pushing you right now to settle, so be careful, because I've noticed that a lot of adjusters have said that the lien claimants are being really pushy right now. They're using all kinds of tactics, telling you that the boards are closed and it could be 6 to 9 months or a year before your hearing is going to be set, and that's just not true. The other thing I've heard is that they will tell an adjuster, well, I tried to reach a defense attorney or a company like ours, a lien settlement company, and they're not answering the phone, so they must not be open. So will you just settle it with me now? I'll give you a good deal. So stick to your guns, use all your same defenses. It's okay to obviously settle, but don't let them bully you or try to scare you into settling just to settle. All of your defenses are still in place. Bill review, I'm assuming that your bill review companies, internal or external, are still working. If you do need help with a bill review on a file, let us know. We have 2 people here who can do them within an hour or 2. So if you need help just with that piece, let me know. So let's move on. The last thing, what everybody wants to talk about, how are we getting things settled? I know Sasha mentioned about what's closed and what's open. So the judges are still working. They are still approving settlements. So for your quote walkthroughs, we are still seeing quite a few walkthroughs approved. With the electronic signatures, we're able to sign for the adjuster and we're able to still get it. This is a hybrid walkthrough, so we're not obviously physically going down to the board and walking something through, and it's not a true 100% e-file. And the difference is that we're working with the judges. So for our company personally, these are all the judges that we work with in person. So they already know our walkthrough team, and now we're just emailing back and forth. So be patient with these judges. A lot of them haven't done it this way before. Some of them are quick to set an order, suspending, and to set it. Others are working with us, and they're emailing us back and saying, can you clarify this? Can you get this? Can you get one more, maybe an ending TD or a beginning PD or something that they need to help make a decision on your approvals? So now is a great time to actually settle these claims because injured workers are looking for money. So if you go back to your old caseload that are open via STIP for future medical, now might be a really good time to reach out to those injured workers and do a CNR instead and try and get them some cash. A lot of these people that are furloughed right now, you'll have to be careful and watch the ones that return to get temporary disability. They think that they might not get paid through the COVID payments, so they're going to possibly return back. We've seen 1 or 2 of those happen so far. I do know that people are receiving their COVID checks. Uh-oh, what happened? It says it's no longer visible. Oh no.
Kris, are you there?
I'm here. Hold on. Did something happen? Did you click a button?
No.
Oh, it's funny. It was said the organizer closed it. So, okay. Well, I'm back. So we'll keep talking. Okay. So we're almost done with this anyways, but so reach out to your injured workers. Right now is a great time to settle. Watch out for the doctors taking people off work. Ask them to clarify that it is in fact related to your original injury. And then lastly, a lot of people are working from home right now, and they're going to use this time to, I guess, reevaluate their priorities. Do they like their job? So I'm curious to see if we're going to see an influx of claims down the road for people who maybe are going to use this time to look for other jobs, or if we're going to see a decrease because we do see a lot of fraudulent claims, and now those might reduce when everybody goes back to work because people are actually appreciative of their jobs. So I'll be very curious to see how that works out. And then the last thing, on the DIR website under the COVID updates, there's a section in there that is support services for injured workers or workers. And then there's one for employer assistance. So if your employers are asking, or your injured workers are asking for any information as it comes up with COVID, there's a really good section on the DIR website. Some of the information on there is a summary chart benefit for injured workers as it impacted by COVID. There's paid sick leave, family leave, pandemic unemployment assistance. And then for the employers, there's information on reduced work hours, comparison charts for California and the federal leaves. So all of that is on there. You'll look like a rock star to your employers and your injured workers when you refer them over there or help them find it. So that's all I have. If there's any questions.
Diann, do we have any questions?
Well, Kris, I'm just curious, how many settlements have you seen since the stay-at-home order has happened? I'm curious to see if you think it's about as same as you would have done during normal times, or what's going on.
So for liens, I would say it's about the same. We've settled at this point about 600 liens since the stay-at-home order just a little over a month ago, or just about a month ago. So that has not really changed. I think the lien claimants are a little more going after it. So they are willing to settle, they're willing to come down. They don't necessarily want to wait for all the hearings. So we are seeing an increase in lien settlements. For the actual injured worker settlements, at first it dropped down, and then once the judges got into the swing of things and approvals, they're up just as high as they have been as well. We've had over 200 injured worker walk-through hybrid settlements approved in the last couple of weeks. So we've really been able to make an impact and help these injured workers get their money.
Well, that's fantastic. It's really nice to see that through this horrible time, when we've had to adjust to so many different things, that something positive is coming out of it. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Wendy.
All right, thank you.
little issue there. So now we're going to talk about records. We'll talk about getting those records. And I just want to let you know that we're very fortunate at MacroPro. We had a pandemic plan in place, and we were able to execute it very quickly. We are able to get most of our employees working remotely, and we still have some employees that are working in the office. And as you can imagine, we are practicing social distancing in the office. We're cleaning between shifts and following state mandates and guidelines, just as other essential businesses are doing. And because we had a pandemic plan in place, we were able to limit the downtime for our clients. So I just wanted to go over a few little questions that some of the folks have been asking, which I'm sure apply to all the record retrieval services. And people are asking, can we still get records? Can we still order records? Absolutely, you can. You can order records. There's quite a few people who are working diligently to facilitate the processing and ordering of records. And the biggest question I think that I get from folks that I talk to, and I get this at least 2 or 3 times a day, is what about the custodians? And what can we expect? Are they working through the COVID-19 pandemic? And here's one of the things that you should know about the custodians. When COVID-19 first came on radar, prior to becoming a pandemic, the custodians were allowing non-employees into their offices. They were taking temperatures and screening them for fevers and coughs, and they would put them in a little observation area for a little while. And once these folks cleared the observation period, they were allowed to go in and scan the records. The minute the coronavirus became a pandemic, the custodians implemented their best practices and shut down their facilities to anyone who was not an employee. The thing to know here is we're still getting records and we're still processing orders, but records aren't going to be obtained as quickly as in the past. Imagine the amount of document retrieval services in California. There are well over 250. And each of them schedules an appointment with different custodians. So imagine a line at the door with folks waiting to get in to scan those records. So here's a visual. I went to Costco to pick up some essentials, and it's 6 feet apart, and I live in Sonoma County, so masks are mandatory. And whoever thought you'd go into a store with a mask on, right? But anyway, the line was just about around the building, and it was 7 o'clock in the morning, and they weren't opening until 8 o'clock. It was just nuts. So if you can imagine, it's probably similar for the custodians of records. Now, the custodians might have just 1 or 2 people in each facility, and some they don't have any at all because they don't have a need to be in the office, and so they're not working at this time. So the few that are working, they have to do the work of all of those document retrieval services because they don't have folks like our folks who come into their offices. So those custodians are helping to process the orders on your behalf. This means it's kind of like rush hour traffic at 4:45, say on Highway 680 or 580 or Highway 101, or if you're in Southern California, the 405. And that's kind of a lot of gridlock, and the traffic's pretty slow. I've been in all of that traffic, probably at 4:45. So there's a phrase that our very own Diann Cohen has been saying for the past few weeks. It's not business as usual at this time. It's business as unusual. And it's really important to remember that it's not business as usual when it comes to getting records from your document retrieval services. So let's talk about the best way to order records and why. The best way to order records really is online. And the reason is when you key in that information, you're providing your document retrieval company with this, within its own system, all of the information that they need to get the records that you need. And when that happens and you put all of that information in, we are able to begin serving the authorizations and the subpoenas right away. And to let you know, we're serving by mail. We can't serve in person anymore. And we also believe that this is one of our best practices. And we don't know if every facility will accept service by mail, but we feel that in order to do the best job for our clients, we have to get you in queue to get those records. And remember that line around the block at Costco? I'm pretty sure that we don't want to stand in the line, but we want to get you at the front of that line. We want to get you in as quickly as possible. And because we have employees, just as other document retrieval companies do, we have employees that are working from home, and we have limited employees in the office. And we don't have a lot of the manpower at this time to do what we used to do in the days past, when you could just email the information on records and then have someone who would take that information, enter it into the system, and get it ready to be served. It can be done, but it'll take a little bit longer, and it can be days maybe before that can happen, depending on the volume of orders that are coming in. And I just want to share with you that the volume right now is tremendous because people have the time to request records. They're not running to the coffee shop to pick up a cup of coffee, and they're not commuting, et cetera, unless you consider walking down the hall the commute. But the thing is, people have more time. So my suggestion is, if you can key in your request directly into your document retrieval services system, I think that's going to be your edge. Now, our customer service team is here to help. And again, we're a little short-staffed, just as all of the document retrieval companies are. Remember, when working with your retrieval service, have patience and give them a little bit of time. Give them a little bit of time to come to return that phone call or to get back to you by that email. They're doing the best that they can do. Working remotely, they don't have everything at their fingertips like they used to do at the office. So it's important to have patience. And again, patience is my recommendation. And when it comes to records delivery, we believe that it's best practices to deliver everything electronically to our clients at this point. We don't know how long the coronavirus can last on surfaces. And sometimes we're receiving records by mail from a custodian, and well, that's paper. And there's a concern for our employees, as there is a concern for our clients. And I know that other document retrieval companies are practicing similar or the same. So at MacroPro, we already have set protocols with custodians. We needed to see if we could go paperless with records, and they were pretty good about working with us. And we're very fortunate here at MacroPro that we have a top-notch IT department. Not all copy services have that. So please know that with some places, it can take more time to get things done than at other places. So again, patience is the best thing right now, in addition to getting the records that you need. Our company is running 3 a.m. to midnight every day. And that gives us time to have our offices clean between shifts, update our system, and to really work hard to get the records that you need. And I need to let you know that about 25% of all custodians are working right now. Maybe a little more, some days a little less, but it's important, again, that word patience is just going to keep coming back. So keep in mind, if you need records nationwide, you can get them, because not all areas of the country are affected the same as California and New York. So we have a department that's overseen by a paralegal who gets all of the out-of-state records. And I know that other document retrieval services have similar or not. Diann, do we have any questions?
Wendy, maybe what we can do is address, I know in the beginning of the pandemic, we did hear the federal government say that there was a loosening of the HIPAA laws, and maybe you can discuss how that affects our industry.
Well, yes. Early on, there was a softening of the HIPAA rules and regulations, not as it applied to claims, not as it applied to records retrieval companies and services. Really, it was more for doctors and hospitals so that they could have access to the information for patients so that they could treat them quicker. They could have all of their medical history pretty much with a phone call, or not even really with a snap of a finger, but yeah, so they could have that information pretty quickly.
Great, thank you.
So we are coming to the end of our hour, and I want to just remind you or tell folks that that weren't able to be on the call earlier, if they logged in a couple minutes late, that in order for your certificate to arrive in your inbox, it's important that you know that you needed to have registered, logged in through that registration confirmation, and you'll get your certificate in about 36 hours after this is finished. So I want to get a final thought from everybody on our panel. And so Brian had to leave, Brian from MedRisk, he had to leave. So Brian is now morphed into the shape of Diann Cohen. Diann,
Yes.
can you give us Brian's final thoughts, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So MedRisk wants you to know that the technology has been available for years to do telemedicine. The universal or the near universal access to Wi-Fi via phone, tablets, computers has been able to make injured workers able to reach out and visit with medical professionals. Because of COVID-19, they are pushing us all into a realm that we never thought was possible, including telemedicine being used so much. But for years now, about 2.5 years, MedRisk has had this capability, and now we're all being kind of forced to not only embrace it, but in some cases really adopt it and appreciate it. So they're available to you. Your clients have access to them. So by all means, let's get them and the medical professionals together.
Sasha, do you have a final thought for us?
Yeah, I think Kris touched on a lot of this, but in these unique circumstances, I highly recommend an eye towards settlement. I know that's what we're all always looking toward to if the price is right, but I find that on a lot of my files at this particular time, and I don't want to take any advantage of those affected by the shelter-in-place restrictions, but I do think that a lot of those injured workers that have either a completely bogus claim or otherwise a trivial injury and are moving on with their employment, I think at this point in time with the shelter-in-place, they may have an opportunity to have a more realistic evaluation of their claim rather than having the liberty to let the claim drag out while their attorney does whatever they do. So I think even if the applicant is not MMI, even if there hasn't been a deposition or a med legal evaluation, have an eye towards settlement. If you can process the claim, value the claim now, have your defense attorney help out, assess what the exposure, what the liability is, and try to see if they bite. Whether we can never force settlement prematurely, but I think this really unique circumstance under which we can achieve that. And as Kris said, the judges have become very accessible, both by email, which is incredibly helpful. Walkthroughs or approvals of settlements are being done in a very expeditious manner. So I highly advise looking for those claims that seem trivial and maybe ripe for settlement.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sasha. Kris?
I just want to say how proud I am of all the adjusters working from home. I see emails at 5 a.m. and 10 p.m. at night, and you guys are working so hard. So keep up the good work, and we appreciate you.
My final thought is going to be a shock, but patience. It's important really to have patience with your document retrieval company. We want to get you all of the records that you need and all of the evidence that you need for your cases. And I just think it's important to have patients. Everybody's doing the very best they can do under the circumstances. And have some patience with your colleagues, with your supervisors and your managers and some of the other people that you work with. For instance, those two-legged colleagues that might be related to you, that might be really young at the age of 2, like Sasha was talking about. And have a little patience with your four-legged furry colleagues. They might want to jump up on your desk and participate in a webinar. And I'm really fortunate that my little guy didn't do that. He's tried. And remember, everybody is doing the best that they can do for you. And we're all in this together. Diann, do you have any any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to share 2 things. First, if you're using a medical authorization form, I'm going to ask you to please let's dump that and let's start using a all-purpose authorization form. During these times when it's harder to get records, we don't want to send the wrong authorization form. Medical authorization form will only allow you to get medical records. It is not going to allow you to be able to get records from an employer, for example. So let's broaden the horizons of our authorization form, and let's use something that's going to give us a little bit more power to get the records you need to determine this claim. And then Wendy has a screen up here. I did a speech for Work Comp Central. It was on obstacles versus accomplishments. And during this really, really hard time, so many of us feel like we're not accomplishing much and that there's a lot of obstacles. And the that truth is also for our injured workers. So this is a 7-minute TED Talks-like speech. And if you get an opportunity, please watch it. I hope that it inspires you and helps you realize that there's so much that you can accomplish and so much we could do to make our injured workers whole again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And thank you to our panelists. We so appreciate your participation and your expertise. Have a wonderful day and be well and stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.